Syria breathed a sigh of relief after rebels toppled the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. It not only marked the end of a 13-year-long civil war, but also the beginning of a new era and a fresh start for the Football Federation of the country. Syria's Football Association changed the color of its logo and the kit of the men's team from their traditional red to green. While the logo and kit change in itself marked a historic moment, Syrian FA's caption points out how much the footballing nation really needed this change. The change isn't just symbolic to the rebel flag, which is used all across Syria, but it's also a modified version of the 1932 flag of independence. So with this, the Football Association wants to send out a clear message that football is now independent and looking ahead to their next chapter. Just like how whole of Syria suffered under the Assad regime, Syrian football too paid a hefty price due to the civil war. The country's economy was plummeting, but Assad's assets were on the rise, from luxury cars to a fancy palace and a lifestyle that Syrians could not even dream of. The Football Association and its players got little to no support from this regime, which was a pattern in the 6-decade-long dynasty rule of the whole family. The nation was struggling, we knew that. The sports structure was slowly getting stifled. The anti-Assad protests began as early as 2011, and the civil war too impacted the football in the country. The Football Association was already struggling, the local clubs in financial ruins for over a decade now. Some haven't even been able to pay their players' wages. And while the league still managed to breathe and stay alive, the stop and start seasons were of no help. Matches had been pushed due to the war. The entire 2010-2011 season was called off because of the civil war. Needless to say, you couldn't really expect spectators at the ground when there was a war at hand. Now, the civil war didn't just impact football financially. An attack near a stadium in the capital, Damascus, resulted in several getting injured and a footballer, Yusuf Suleiman, getting killed. This, of course, then resulted in several footballers fleeing the country. The civil war also divided the national football team into 3 camps: pro-Assad, pro-democracy and neutral, which only made the already crumbling footballing structure of Syria more fragile and fractured. The sport of football had become a political landmine. One of Syria's finest footballers, in fact, Firas al-Khatib, even refused to represent Syria in solidarity with those seeking freedom. This was a decade ago.
There are players who have refused to represent the national team for the time being because they believe they represent a certain side. But I disagree with their position. We represent our flag, and our allegiance is towards this country.
Syrian football was grappling with such varied issues over the many years. The irony was that the very thing that was being ripped apart is what had always brought Syrians together: their love for football. Syria was a nation on the rise before the war overtook their surge. It all started when the national side reached the final of the Asian Champions League. They qualified for the Asian Cup tournament in 2011, their first in 15 years. The nation was inching towards its quest for footballing glory. But given the consistent struggles, it became difficult for the Syrian national team to really keep their momentum going. Owing to security concerns in the country, FIFA banned Syria from hosting any matches. The country hasn't hosted an international for as long as 14 years and counting, since 2010. The multiple effects that a corrupt regime had on the football in the country, which is why when the president was booted out of by the rebels, the whole nation stood up and celebrated. Despite zero support, despite all the obstacles, Syria continued to show some glimpses of their potential of late. They reached the round of 16 at the AFC Asia Cup earlier this year. They've beaten the likes of India to clinch the Intercontinental Cup. So clearly the Syrian spirit showed that they can continue the fight for a sport that they love. They reached the second round of the AFC World Cup qualifiers. Had the situation back home been any different, you'd think they would have progressed further. Because the only thing that has been standing tall through the turmoil of decades has been the spirit of the Syrian footballers. Their only intention is to give the football-crazy nation some joy. And with Assad's fall, the green of Syria also represents the freedom of football, the kind of football that is ready to take on the rest of the world.